Good afternoon. We begin with breaking news from South Africa, where police have arrested two suspects following a shooting incident at the Johannesburg home of the late former Zimbabwean president, Robert Mugabe. This is a developing story with international implications, and we are going to bring you a deep dive analysis over the next 12 minutes. I am your host, and we have a panel of experts joining us to unpack what happened, why it matters, and what it tells us about the security landscape for former heads of state across the continent. The incident occurred yesterday, February 19th, 2026, at approximately 10 p.m. local time at Mugabe's Hyde Park residence. According to initial police statements, two individuals were apprehended on the scene and are now in custody, being questioned as part of an attempted murder investigation. No further details about the victims or the precise circumstances of the shooting have been officially released. This news has sent shockwaves through diplomatic and political circles, given Robert Mugabe's towering, yet deeply controversial, legacy. Mugabe, who passed away in September 2019, ruled Zimbabwe for 37 years, from independence in 1980 until his ousting in a 2017 military coup. His death did little to settle the fierce debates about his rule, which is remembered both for leading the liberation struggle and for presiding over economic collapse and severe political repression. The fact that his family home, 5 years after his death, has become the scene of a violent crime raises immediate and troubling questions. To understand the context, we need to look at the security apparatus typically afforded to former leaders. In many African nations, former presidents receive state-funded security details for life. This is a standard practice, seen as both a courtesy and a necessity given the sensitive information they possess and the enemies they may have made. In Zimbabwe, the tradition has been maintained, though its consistency and funding have been questioned. For instance, following Mugabe's death, reports indicated his widow, Grace Mugabe, continued to receive state security. However, the size and capability of that detail have been subjects of speculation, especially given Zimbabwe's well-documented economic challenges. Let us bring in our first perspective. Dr. Annika Okoye, a professor of African political history at the University of Nairobi. Dr. Okoye, what is your immediate reaction to this incident? Thank you. My immediate thought is that this is a profound security failure, but one that may have been predictable. We must consider the location. This did not happen in Harare, but in Johannesburg, South Africa. Robert Mugabe owned multiple properties, and his family has spent considerable time in South Africa since his fall from power. The security protocols in a foreign country are inherently more complex. They involve coordination between private security firms, potentially residual Zimbabwean state protection, and the South African Police Service. This layered and possibly fragmented system creates vulnerabilities. Furthermore, we have to examine the motive. Attempted murder is an extreme act. Is this a criminal act like a botched robbery? Is it politically motivated, perhaps targeting family members who are still politically active or who hold secrets? Or is it connected to the complex and often opaque business dealings that surrounded Mugabe's inner circle? Without knowing the target, it is hard to say, but the brazen nature, a shooting at a high-profile home in an affluent suburb, suggests either significant desperation or significant backing. Thank you, Dr. Okoye. That leads us to the critical question of motive and the ongoing police probe. South African police, specifically the Johannesburg Central SAPS, have been tight-lipped. We know they have two suspects in custody. Standard procedure in a high-profile case like this would involve forensic analysis, ballistics, CCTV review from the neighborhood, and intense interrogation. The Hyde Park area is known for its wealth, and consequently, its private security infrastructure. It is likely that home security systems and patrols captured evidence. The challenge for investigators will be separating the noise, the general criminal activity in Johannesburg, which has a high crime rate, from a signal that points to a specific, targeted plot. Let us visualize one aspect of this challenge. Johannesburg's crime statistics for the last quarter of 2025, released just last month, provide some context. The city recorded over 1,200 reported incidents of serious violent crime in its northern suburbs, which include areas like Hyde Park, Sandton, and Rosebank. That is an average of roughly 13 incidents per day in that affluent corridor. However, home invasions or shootings at specifically fortified, high-profile residences are a much smaller subset. Out of those 1,200-plus incidents, only about 52, or just over 4%, involved properties with registered private armed response teams. And of those, Only a dozen in the past 6 months have led to arrests within 24 hours. This case, with 2 arrests already, sits in that rare category, suggesting either exceptional police work or that the perpetrators were unusually conspicuous. Now, for a different angle, we turn to Colonel James Mwangi, retired, a former director of diplomatic protection here in Kenya. Colonel Mwangi, from a pure security standpoint, what does this incident reveal? Thank you. It reveals several critical gaps. First, the principle of concentric security rings. A former head of state's residence should have multiple layers: an outer perimeter, perhaps a wall or fence with sensors, an inner physical guard presence, and a secure inner sanctum. A shooting that occurs, presumably on the grounds or very close to the home, indicates a breach of at least the first ring. Second, it speaks to intelligence failure. Whether the threat was criminal or political, a competent protective detail operates on proactive intelligence, knowing who might pose a threat and monitoring them. The fact that an armed engagement occurred suggests either no prior intelligence or an inability to act on it. Third, and Dr. Okoye touched on this, is the cross-border complication. When a former leader resides abroad, who is ultimately responsible? The host nation's police cannot be expected to provide a dedicated, state-level detail. The sending country's resources are stretched. This often leads to a hybrid model that can be poorly defined and under-resourced. I would be very interested to see the contract and operational protocol between the Mugabe family's private security and any remaining official Zimbabwean protection officers. That document, if it exists, is now a key piece of evidence. A compelling point, Colonel. The cross-border element is crucial. It makes me think of other former African leaders living abroad. We have examples like Ethiopia's Hailemariam Desalegn, who has spent time in South Africa, or Yemen's former president, who lived in exile in Saudi Arabia for years. The security and legal responsibilities become a diplomatic gray area. This incident may prompt a review in capitals across the continent. Could it also be related to the turbulent politics within Zimbabwe itself? Robert Mugabe's legacy is still a battleground. The ruling ZANU-PF party, now led by President Emerson Mnangagwa, who was Mugabe's vice president before orchestrating his removal, has a complicated relationship with the Mugabe family. Grace Mugabe was a fierce political player and is still seen as a figurehead by a faction loyal to her husband's original legacy. There have been public spats over property, inheritance, and political symbolism. Just last year, in 2025, a dispute over the control of the Mugabe family's business empire, estimated to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, spilled into the courts. Could this violence be an extension of those internal fights taken to South African soil? Let us bring in our final perspective. Advocate Thandiwe Ndlovu, a Johannesburg-based legal analyst specializing in transnational crime. Advocate Ndlovu, what are the likely legal pathways from here? Good afternoon. The legal process is now squarely under South African jurisdiction. The 2 arrested individuals will be held, likely at the Johannesburg Central Police cells. They have the right to legal representation and must be charged within 48 hours if the police have sufficient evidence. The charges will be serious, attempted murder, possession of illegal firearms, and possibly trespassing or malicious damage to property. The National Prosecuting Authority will decide whether to oppose bail, which, given the high-profile nature and severity of the charges, is almost certain. They will argue the accused are a flight risk and may interfere with the investigation. The investigation itself will be multifaceted. The Hawks, South Africa's elite police investigative unit, may take over from local SAPS. They will look at the suspects' backgrounds, financial records, phone records, and possible international links. A critical question will be, were they acting alone or were they hired? If it is the latter, the charge could escalate to conspiracy, and the investigation becomes a hunt for the mastermind. This is where international cooperation may be needed. If evidence points to planners or funders in Zimbabwe, South Africa would need to make a formal request for mutual legal assistance, which can be a slow and politically sensitive process. Given the current diplomatic climate between South Africa and Zimbabwe, which has been strained over trade and political issues, this could add a layer of complexity. Thank you. So, we have a developing criminal case in South Africa, with potential political undertones stretching back to Zimbabwe. Let us consider the numbers that might define this probe. We understand from sources close to the investigation that the police response was swift. According to our information, the first armed response vehicle arrived on the scene within 4 minutes of the alarm being triggered. The South African Police Service mobilized a significant team. At the height of the response, there were approximately 120 personnel involved, including forensics, detectives, and a tactical unit to secure the perimeter. As of this morning, investigators have cataloged over 200 separate pieces of evidence from the scene. Furthermore, they are reviewing footage from an estimated 15 different CCTV cameras in the immediate neighborhood. Processing all this digital evidence is a massive task. The ballistics report alone, matching any recovered shell casings to known firearms, typically takes a minimum of 72 hours in a priority case like this. The pressure on the authorities is immense, both from the media and from diplomatic channels. The Zimbabwean government has reportedly made discreet inquiries through its embassy in Pretoria, seeking assurances about the thoroughness of the investigation and the safety of the Mugabe family members. This incident transcends a simple crime report. It touches on history, politics, security, and international law. It forces us to ask, what do nations owe their former leaders, especially those with divisive legacies? How is that responsibility maintained when those leaders choose to live outside the country? And in an era of globalized wealth and conflict, how do we protect high-profile individuals from threats that may originate thousands of miles away? The arrest of two suspects is just the beginning. The real story will be written in the coming days and weeks, as motives are uncovered and networks exposed. It is a stark reminder that the past is never truly buried, and its shadows can sometimes manifest in sudden violence. For the Mugabe family, it is a traumatic invasion of privacy and safety. For South African authorities, it is a high-stakes test of their investigative capabilities. For observers of African politics, it is a fascinating, if disturbing, case study in the long afterlife of power. We will, of course, continue to follow this story closely and bring you updates as they emerge. For now, this has been a Kenya News Update Today deep dive analysis. I would like to thank our guests, Dr. Annika Akoy, Colonel James Mwangi, and Advocate Tandu Ndilavu. Subscribe to Kenya News Update Today for more in-depth coverage of stories that shape our world.